Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our webinar, the first of the series this semester on in engineering ethics, basically. It is entitled Ethics and AI. Today, we are privileged to have Mr. Christophe Zoghbi with us, a visionary leader and software engineer with over 12 years of experience in software development and various fields of data science and AI, artificial intelligence. As the founder and CEO of Zaka, an esteemed artificial intelligence education and consulting company, Christophe spearheads initiatives aimed at cultivating and advancing the sector of AI in Lebanon and the MENA region. His dedication to nurturing AI expertise and innovation has been pivotal in shaping the landscape of AI development in the region. Moreover, as the founder and president of Beirut AI, an influential NGO in Lebanon, Christophe orchestrates the convergence of the applied artificial intelligence community. Through this platform, uh, he impacts community events and technical workshops, fostering a deeper understanding and practical application of AI among professionals and enthusiasts. Christoph's profound expertise and commitment to ethical AI practices makes him a guiding light in the realm of AI ethics. Today, we are honored to welcome him as our speaker, where he's going to share his insights and experiences navigating the ethical considerations surrounding AI development. Christophe, the floor is yours. I hope you enlighten us with your experience into ethics and AI in this webinar.
Thank you so much, Michelle, for the introduction. Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. So you should be able to see the screen, my slides. We're going to talk about ethics and artificial intelligence, which is a big field by itself, and I hope to kind of give you the foundations and the basic concepts during today's presentation. Do not wait for me until I finish the presentation to ask your questions. If you have any question or anything you would like to ask during the presentation, you can write that in the chat. I'll try to keep an eye out on the chat, or you can unmute and ask me your question. So that way we'll make it an engaging session. So let's get started. I want to start by talking a bit about the impact of artificial intelligence and talk about the positive impact before we can start to discuss the challenges and the problems of AI. And so obviously, artificial intelligence has been helpful and has a lot of positive impact for us, mainly in reducing any human error, because AI is a software at the end of the day. It's something that does not get tired, does not get bored, does not make mistakes because it's simply not paying attention, for example. So it's really helping us avoid sometimes any human error, and it's always available, and it's something that's always helping us to achieve something. In most cases, AI is taking risks instead of humans. When we build these, let's say, robots that go and explore the solar system or space in general, right? These are systems that leverage sometimes AI technologies to take risk instead of humans, which minimizes any human loss of lives. And sometimes it's also helping us eliminate or automate some repetitive tasks so that we can focus our time on more productive and interesting tasks that we'd like to work on. So obviously there's a lot of other impacts and positive impact of AI, but my point is artificial intelligence is not a perfect technology, right? There's a lot of challenges, there's a lot of problems that we have to focus on. And so I would like to quickly go through some of the problems that we have in AI and then focus on the ethics, which is the biggest part of all of these challenges. So starting with the data scarcity as the main issue or the main problem that we can find sometimes. So we all know that AI doesn't really exist without data. We need a large amounts of data to actually train good quality models. And so data scarcity is whenever we don't really have enough data sets or maybe good quality data set to train something. And if you look at the chart that I'm showing you here, you can see that specifically when we talk about deep learning, these models, they tend to keep on improving, keep getting better with more data that you give them. So we don't really have like a limit on how much data we need to solve a certain problem. When we're talking about deep learning, we can give it literally as much data as we'd like to give it, and with more data, the performance is going to increase more and more. And so again, going back to the problem itself, there's a lot of use cases, or there's a lot of challenges where for this problem, we don't have enough data, or maybe we do have some data, but it's noisy, it has incorrect information, sometimes it's incomplete, or it's missing something. So the quality of the data directly impacts the quality of the model, and having low quality or no data at all will impact definitely the quality of the models that you're training them on. So this is kind of the main challenges that you can discuss when it comes to building AI models. The second problem we're going to talk about is a bit of on the security side, something that we call adversarial attacks. And so adversarial attacks are basically ways that malicious users can manipulate the output of our models. So if I train an AI model, and this model, let's say, takes a picture and classifies this picture into one of the many categories that we have, a certain user can manipulate the input, can manipulate the image to give it a different output from the model. So let me show you a few examples. This is a very basic example of a digit classification model. So just to show you the concept behind the attack, you have the initial image, which is in this case the handwritten digit of the number 8. And then if I add some noise, some distortion to this image, so that it's still kind of visible for us humans that it's still an image of the letter or the number 8, but for the model, it's going to classify it as 3, as the number 3. So these attacks rely on small changes to the input to affect the total output of the model. And this has been applied in different cases. For example, on Tesla cars, because we know that Tesla cars have cameras. And so if you notice here in the video, you can see that the model or the car was actually triggered by a certain pattern on the screen, that the car thought that it's raining, and that's why the wipers started moving, although there is no rain happening. So some random patterns sometimes can trigger the car into thinking that it's raining, or that into saying some different, making decisions differently. Another example was what you can see here on the slide, which is that we can add some stickers to a stop sign. And in this case, the car will no longer recognize this as a stop sign, but actually as the speed limit of 45. And so we can make cars misread signs or misbehave based on some different inputs. And another applicable or another example of this case is applied on the medical cases. So imagine you have an AI that can classify cells into cancerous and non-cancerous cells. And you can see here that initially the original image, the AI classified this as a benign cell. So absolutely nothing wrong with the cell. But when we added some random adversarial noise, we call it, to the image, which still kind of looks the same for us, for the humans, but for the AI, it's now 100% malignant. So we were able to affect 100% or change 100% the output of the AI model based on few changes to the input image. And these are called adversarial attacks. So this shows that our models, no matter how accurate from a percentage perspective they can be, they're still vulnerable to these attacks. And we need to make sure that they are more robust to these adversarial attacks. And a small example, a lot of these face recognition systems can be easily tricked by wearing, let's say, a face mask like this one, where it's locating different faces inside of the mask instead of the whole human face. So you can evade these softwares by wearing specific shapes and specific patterns. So hopefully this is good. I see there's no questions yet in the chat, so I'm going to keep going. If you have any questions, please do write that in the chat. So the third problem I want to talk about are actually the ethical challenges, because there's a lot of things that contain under the ethical challenges. So let's kind of open up this topic and dive more into it. And before we talk about ethical challenges of AI, let's first define ethics, right? So what are ethics? Ethics are actually a way to answer questions like and what is bad, or what is right and what is wrong. So it's a set of values that allows us to kind of figure out, is this a good thing to do? Is this a bad thing to do? Should I do this? Should I not do this? So this is what we call ethics in general, figuring out the difference between right and wrong. And we also have to talk about a concept that we call a moral agent. And so a moral agent is someone who can judge what is right and what is wrong. And more importantly, not only do we judge based on that, we're also held accountable. So the whole idea of a moral agent is that it's easy to figure out that based on this set of ethics, this is good and this is bad. But when you take an action based on that, you should be held accountable. And that's why we humans, if someone steals, for example, we lock them up in jails, right? Because that person, we assume that they are moral agent. We assume that they know that this is bad to steal, and still they did make this bad decision. So they need to be held accountable, and the accountability is very important in the whole idea of ethics. And so we discuss what ethics are and what moral agents are. And so we bring it back to the topic of artificial intelligence. And the idea is that developing these AI systems should not be kind of outside of the realm of ethics and outside of the impact of what these systems can do on society. So now that we've been building these systems, for pretty much some time, and we have very, very powerful systems, we need to make sure these systems are impacting society in a good way. And so some of the problems that we have found in these systems, or some of the issues that we have to talk about today, we can start by mentioning the fake news and the deep fake disinformation. So we now have a lot of AI models that can generate content, whether it's text, whether it's images, whether it's videos. These content can be pretty much fake, or can include some fake information, and it's contributing to the fake news problem that we have on the internet. We also have the problem of the transparency, or the black box, that we'll talk about later today, the bias problem, the security and the data privacy, the IP ownership, and finally the environmental impact. So there's a lot of problems that are mentioned or put front by these AI systems, and so we can discuss them under the ethical framework space. And so, what are some challenges of the AI ethics? Why is it difficult to maybe regulate or to have some ethical framework that everyone is following? Well, first of all, the first point we have to talk about is the idea that usually companies that are building these AI systems, that are developing these systems, they are motivated by profit, right? They do not really, unfortunately, they do not really care about doing what's right or what's wrong. They care about what makes most money. And so, and the chances that what makes more money is aligned with what is good, then okay, that's a great news for everyone. But in most cases, what makes money is not always what's good. So that's why we end up having systems that are not really ethical, if you want to call them that. So that's the first problem, or the first point. The next challenge is basically we don't really have a single ethical framework that everyone agrees on. So what I believe is right, you might think that that's wrong, or what you believe is right, I might think it's wrong. So people have different values and different ways that they go about their lives. So we really have to make sure that everyone aligns on a single framework. Otherwise, it's going to be a bit difficult to agree. Here's what is right. Here's what is wrong. So that's another challenge. And then the third challenge would be responsibility, right? So even if we decide that it's wrong to kill people, and we all agree that it's wrong to kill people, what happens if a self-driving car is on the road and then I don't know, it makes an accident and someone dies? Who is responsible for that? Is it the car itself? Do we blame the car? Do we blame the company that built the car? Do we blame the person who actually bought the car? There's a lot of nuances when it comes to this scenario, and so this is why it's difficult, because we don't know where responsibility lies. Who is responsible? Who is accountable? And if you go back to the moral agent concept, we need people to be accountable for these actions, because because that makes everything right. If someone knows that this is bad and then still takes the action, then that person should be held responsible. So these are some of the challenges, and it's important to teach our algorithms to be ethical, because you've seen now how AI is rapidly moving through the world and how it's being applied in different places, different industries, in different ways. And so we don't want to wake up in a world where AI is everywhere, but actually it's not behaving to the best of our interest. And also, if you want people to trust and to adopt AI, we need to make sure that they can trust AI. So if you don't know how the system is behaving, if you don't know what the values of the system are, then you're not going to be able to trust it, right? So we need people to trust AI systems so that we can adopt them and we can have them part of our lives. So that's why there's a lot of challenges, and that's why we have to focus on the laws, on having regulators place frameworks, put regulations, put guides for these companies that are developing AIs, that they have to kind of adhere to specific regulations, right? So we need to make sure that these laws are guiding the development of AI technology. So this brings us to the idea of the AI ethical frameworks. So what is an AI framework? So ethical frameworks are ways or attempts to build a consensus around values. As I told you earlier, we don't have a single ethical framework that everyone relies on, but at least if we can agree that here are some things that we all agree should be protected, let's say, here's the good, here's the bad. This is one way to have a consensus around the values and the norms that can be adopted by community. And so it's important to have frameworks because this is what's going to make sure that any company that is developing an AI system cannot just develop everything at once and release it into the world without proper guidance, without proper ethical standards, without proper oversight from regulators or government or whoever is doing that. So that way, we're making sure that people who are doing AI are actually caring about humanity, about some values that we put on, about what we care most about. And so when we talk about ethical frameworks, um, there are some examples out there. It's not a lot, but we do have some companies and some organizations that have put forth some frameworks, like the UN, like the Singapore government, and Microsoft is one of those companies that put out what they call a responsible AI framework. And I really like the way Microsoft framed it because it's pretty simple and straightforward. And so they have 6 pillars in their responsible AI framework. The pillars are accountability, transparency, fairness, reliability and safety, privacy and security, and finally inclusiveness. So I'm going to go through each one of those pillars and explain a bit what what does it mean and how does this relate to AI. But first, I want to make sure that everything is clear and no one has any questions. So, do we have any questions before we continue? Okay, all clear. Perfect. So let's get started. The first point or pillar is the accountability pillar. So what is accountability? Accountability means someone being responsible for a certain behavior, right? You're accountable for that. You acknowledge that there are some responsibility, that are some actions taken by actors, and these actors are responsible for that decision, right? So that's the idea of accountability, and it's kind of linked to the idea of responsibility as well. So just because there's accountability, it means that people are responsible for their actions, and in this case, we're talking about legal responsibility and moral responsibility. So the legal responsibility is basically when an actor behaves in an illegal way and then they can be penalized or put to jail. So, for example, um, it's illegal to steal. If you steal something, you're going to be put in jail. And sometimes there might not be a legal responsibility, but at least there's a moral responsibility, right? So you are responsible for an act and you can be blamed for it, even if it's not illegal, but it's still morally wrong. Like, for example, I don't know, it's not illegal actually to not maybe feed your dog, right? If you got a dog and you just keep it without you feeding it, I don't know, it might not be totally illegal, but it's morally wrong. So you have to also be morally responsible for your actions. And so when we apply this on AI, again, it goes back to the most important point, which is if AI systems are not held accountable, if they're not responsible for their actions, then people will not be trusting them. So imagine you go into a hospital in the future, and then you're going to do a surgery, and then you find out that the doctor is actually an AI. So an AI will be automating the whole surgery and applying it and or performing the surgery for you. Would you trust that system? Would you trust a complete AI to actually operate on you? If you don't really know the accountability and the responsibility behind that, you're not going to be able to trust AI with your life. right? So another example would be uh, in planes. If you're traveling, you know that mm, the majority of the plane trip is actually automated by an AI, by software. So the pilots are there just for the takeoff and landing, and just in case something happens, right? But the majority of the flight is being handled by a AI system or automated system. And so having the pilots there kind of makes us feel like there's someone who is going to be held responsible. If something happens, this person, this pilot, we know their name, we know everything, this person will be held responsible for whatever happens. And so this kind of gives us a peace of mind that things are controllable. But if you went into a self-driving car and you literally saw no one behind the wheel, you're going to be a bit hesitant to actually feel comfortable because you don't know who's going to be held accountable. So that's why it's important for companies, developers, people who are building these systems to be held responsible, at least for that system. And this is an example in the self-driving car. Um, just puts the concept that I spoke about earlier. Imagine you're in a self-driving car on the highway, and then suddenly your car, something in front of your car starts, falling on your car, and your car needs to make a decision: do I go left or do I go right? And on the right side there's a motorcycle, like a two-wheeler, and on the left side there's a SUV. So if the car went straight, it's gonna be hitting those objects. If it went to the right, it's gonna be hit the motorcycle. If it goes on the left, then it's gonna be hitting that person. So which option or action should your car decide on, or should your car prioritize? And again, it's important because if we humans are making that decision, then it's not a decision. It's an instinct, right? It's a reaction. So humans do not think that fast. So you have to make a reaction. Whatever you make will end up being judged as a quick reaction to this situation. However, if a car is making that, it's a decision because cars or softwares are thinking 1,000 times every second. So it's no longer a quick reaction. It's actually thought. It's a well thought idea or a decision. And so, what do we tell the car to do? What is the decision to make? That's what we have to be teaching those systems. Um, so that's kind of the accountability pillar, and in my opinion, one of the main important pillars in this ethical framework. We next move on to the transparency pillar, which is basically important to understand what's happening inside of a system. So what is transparency and why is it important? It's actually figuring out how a system works, what are the logic or the rules or the ways that the system is kind of working, right? What are the inner workings of that system? And it's important because of three main things, right? It's important because of the justifications of decision. So if an AI makes a decision, I want to be able to understand why it made that decision. So what's the justification? I have the right to know, right? So people have the right to know if let's say your application has been rejected, if you're applying for a loan and the bank rejects your loan, you have the right to understand why it was rejected, right? So if the bank says, I have no idea why the system told me rejected, and we don't know why the system decided that, then it's not actually something that you can be comfortable with. So you have the right to know, and the moral obligation to understand the consequences of our actions. So if you take a decision and it leads you to being eliminated or rejected for something, you have a moral obligation to understand, why this happened. So for those reasons, transparency in these systems is very important. And currently, what we have is a black box. The current AI systems, we give them inputs, and then they give us outputs. And sometimes the output is great and it's so accurate and it's perfect. So we don't really think that this is a problem. But actually, it is a problem because we don't really know why the output was like that. We don't know what's the reasoning or what's the logic behind this output. So ideally, we need to unlock this black box and figure out what's happening inside of the model. What's the inner workings of that model? And this is exactly what the transparency pillar is all about. So when we talk about AI transparency, we have to talk about two different types of transparency. We have the model transparency, and then we have the process transparency. And so to dive more into each of those, the model transparency is actually the model itself, like the model's code and the way that the model kind of link the input to the output. So it's looking inside of the model. It's looking at why when you said this is rejected or this is approved, what did you actually do? What are the correlations or the link between the input and the output and what's happening inside of the model? So it's actually opening up the model and understanding a bit the logic. But when you talk about the process transparency, and this is a bit more broad, because in this case, I'm not talking about the model itself, but how I got to building that model. So for example, what data did I use? Was it good enough? What was the quality of that data? How did I perform the whole training part? Did I clean the data? Did I change anything with it? Did I anonymize it or not? So anything to do with the data collection, with the training part, and then after we actually train the model, how am I using that model? So what scenarios, what situations am I using the model in? And so that's called the process transparency. And we need both actually, right? We need the model itself and then how we got to the model to be clear, to be transparent, so that people ideally trust these systems. So again, to go back to the example that I just gave you, the explainability is if I apply to a loan, for example, to a loan in a bank, and then the bank just asks this AI model to predict, and then the model says you rejected, and I have no idea, and the bank has no idea why it was rejected. That's not a good thing, right? I need to be able to explain and understand the output of the algorithm. And in this case, we talk about a field called explainable AI. So explainable AI or XAI is a field in the artificial intelligence field that really focuses on building tools and frameworks to understand and interpret machine learning models. So we're building models that not just predicts correctly, but also kind of explain why they predicted this answer. So they kind of provide explanations or a bit information to allow us to debug any behavior from that model. And that's called the explainable AI. So one example of that model would be to have, let's say, a computer vision model that can show us what it's looking at whenever it's making a decision. So in this case, we have an image captioning model that it's an AI model that takes an image and writes a description on that image. So when we give it this image and the caption turns out to be a man in jacket standing at the slot machine. So for us to make sure that's actually understanding correctly, we look at, okay, whenever you look at him or you say it's a man, where are you exactly looking? What are the pixels that you're focusing on? And this heat map shows us that it's actually focusing on this area right here, which is the man, right? And then the jacket is this area right here, and then standing, slot, machine, etc. So it's actually, we can validate that the reasoning is logical, it's correct, and it must be making good decisions. And that's basically explainable AI or explainability in the field of AI. Again, please stop me if you have any questions or anything that's not clear. And I'm going to continue because we have no questions. So the third pillar is the fairness pillar, okay? Fair. So again, each of these pillars it's a topic by itself, and I'm just trying to quickly summarize the concept behind it. So when we talk about fairness, we have to kind of differentiate between equality and equity. So equality is when I treat everyone the same way. You all get one box to stand on. Whereas equity is when everyone gets what they need to be successful. So if you're, taller than the other people, you might not need a box, whereas someone who's really short might need two boxes, for example, or one box. So the image explains it really well. But again, it's important to differentiate between equality and equity. And when we talk about AI systems, fairness is important because we want these systems to be treating everyone the same way. Not, for example, differentiate between a male and a female, between your race, your gender, your religion, your whatever it is. Everyone should be treated the same way. But unfortunately, there's a human bias in every step of the process of building AI systems. So collecting data might include biases. Labeling data might include human bias. Training the models might have bias as well. So we need to find ways to remove the bias from the process and end up with AI systems that are unbiased and that can treat everyone in the fair and balanced manner. So to give you an example of the bias, I'm sure you've heard of this example or maybe other examples. There's an AI model back in 2015. So Amazon wanted to automate some part of the recruitment process. So they built an AI system that can filter CVs and then select the top 5 or 10 CVs from whatever CVs they end up receiving, and then those top CVs will be sent to recruiters, and they will be scheduling interviews and following up with the process and everything. So so they built a system. It took CVs, it filtered them, and it chose the top ones. And after they've trained and deployed and started using this model, they've realized that the model is biased against females. So if you're a female, you are less likely to find a job at Amazon. And of course, no one likes that, right? No one wants to be discriminated against females. But the reason why this happened is because the data that they've used, the historical data that they've used to train the system, mostly has male information. Because historically speaking, most people who worked at Amazon were males. So the AI automatically understood that if you're a female, you are less likely to be able to find a job at Amazon. So it started rejecting females. Of course, that's not the case. We don't want that. And so they ended up fixing and changing the model and kind of removing some inherent bias that no one actually wanted to include, but it was included in the system. So how do we remove bias from the data? There's different ways, different examples, but just to quickly summarize it, there's something called the anti-classification. So we remove explicit variables from the data. So we remove information like the gender, we remove the ethnicity, we remove anything that might be inferring this information. So we kind of anonymize it in that phase. Or sometimes we can resample. So if I know that I have way less females than males in my data set, then I can maybe give it the same amount of males and females as an equal representation of both, so that I would not kind of push my model to be biased against females. So that's one way to do it, right? Resampling of the data set. The next pillar is the reliability and safety pillar. So reliability is very important because we want to have systems that are working reliably, that are working without failure for a given time interval under given conditions. So if you turn on your car, right, and you want to drive, you can always assure that anytime you turn on the car, most likely the car will turn on and it's going to behave in that way, and you're going to drive it and you're going to go from your home to your work or whatever and come back. So when systems are reliable, they are used efficiently in our everyday lives. And again, systems, AI systems, when we need to deploy them and use them day to day, they have to be reliable. So they have to perform as required without failure for a given time interval under given conditions. So obviously that's important. And then we talk about the safety in AI. So we don't only want them to be reliable, but we also want them to be safe. We want them to be used correctly to not harm any human, physical or psychological harm, right? So AI systems should not, under defined conditions, cause physical or physiological harm or lead to a state in which human life, health, property, or environment is in danger. And I don't know if you remember this movie, the iRobot.
A robot cannot harm a human.
But in this case, they just talk about the 3 laws of robotics. So a robot cannot harm any human being. Yes, but I mean, I'm not gonna watch the video, but actually, if you go to the next slide, you can see here the 3 laws of robotics. So the first law says that a robot may not injure a human being or through inaction allow a human being to come to harm. The second law is basically a robot must obey orders given by humans, except where these orders conflict with the first law. And then a robot must protect its own existence as long as such protection does not conflict with the first or the second law. Of course, these are not official laws that were drafted in actual law. This is in science fiction. So these are the Asimov's 3 laws. That's part of a book that was written, and it's science fiction. But just an example of how laws can be actually drafted and how rules can be put into these systems to make sure that they're always going to behave to the best interest of humans, right? So yes, your goal is to obey humans and do whatever a human tells you, but of course not that whenever a human tells you to hurt another human, for example, right? So there are these things that we have to think about and we have to put forth to guide these AI systems. When we talk about the safety, we can also talk about different types of safety, not just physical safety. For example, whenever we have the cameras, right? We have a camera system that has some AI included in it, and it's monitoring, it's detecting people, it's understanding, the surroundings. So like in surveillance, for example. This is very important because it is very like it can be used for good, right? We can have these cameras monitor activities, terrorist activities. Someone, a thief or someone who did something bad can be caught on camera. We can identify them. We can track them. We can, arrest them eventually. But at the same time, these systems can also be used to keep track of everyone, to like use it for negative. For example, the way it's used in China, where people are actually being monitored all the time, whatever they do, and I mean, it might have some negative effects, right? So safety is good, but at the same time, we have to figure out what are we actually maybe sacrificing in return of that safety. So that's around the AI safety. The next pillar, it's important to talk about the privacy and the security of the data, because as we said earlier, AI does not exist without data. We need a lot of data, and we need data that's sometimes private and sometimes important for specific users. So one of the main important challenges and ethical challenges for companies is how do we make sure that the users' data is protected and is preserved, and that we are, keeping this data in good format, because users are trusting us with this data, right? Whenever you use any tool, any platform, and you give it that your data, the data can be used against you. So you're kind of trusting that company with your information, and you make sure Google that, for example, if you use a Gmail and you're receiving important emails, you kind of rely on Google to maintain your access to your Gmail and your information private. You don't want hackers to be able to access your emails and affect your life. So that's very important. And when I talk about privacy, sometimes if you're, let's say, let's talk about medical use cases, right? If you have a medical data set that includes information about patients, medical information, medical history, this is super private. Like no one wants someone else to know or everyone to know that they have, I don't know, a specific medical history. And so in this case, whoever is using that data to train systems, we have to make sure that the data is private and that we are not identifying people from that information. So one of the main important frameworks around regulating data privacy is the GDPR framework that was released years ago from the European Union. And it's a legal framework that recognizes several privacy rights. And it was actually the first of its kind, and now everyone adopts a similar approach. So if you don't know this by now, the GDPR gives you 4 rights for individuals, right? The first right is the right to be informed. So you as a person, you have the right to be told about the use of your personal data. So if I am using your data, I have to tell you that I'm collecting your first name, your last name, your email, for example, and I'm using those to do etc. The second right is the right of access. So it should be explained how your data is being used. So I'm collecting this information to be used for that reason. The right to rectification. So you can decide to be forgotten, the right to be forgotten, or to delete the data. So you can say, okay, I no longer want you to use my data, and I also want you to delete everything you have on me. You have that right, and I have to comply with this right. And then the last right is to restrict processing. So you can deny the use of your data. You can say, okay, you can use my email, for example, or you can use my first name, but you cannot use my email. So these are the rights that this framework gives to individuals to protect their data. And so to go back to the idea of you have a data set, for example, that includes information, instead of just feeding that to the AI model directly, you can anonymize the data. So you can remove any information that can refer to a confidential information or maybe a personal identification, so PII. So if you have a person's name, maybe you can remove the name, right? Or replace it with a pseudonym, or you can remove their age or their location or something that might be referring back to them specifically. So some examples to do that would be to generalization, so remove some data to make it less identifiable, or pseudo-anonymization, which means replace private identifiers like names, ID with some fake ones. So it's still, if my name is Chris, I can just change that to John, right, or whatever. So I'm changing a bit that so that it's not really linked back to my personal information. Or I can just create synthetic, so I can create fake or artificially generated AI data sets to basically follow the same structure, but without having actual data. So this is synthetic data. So the last pillar in the Microsoft framework is the inclusiveness. So Microsoft, they focus a lot on inclusivity, and accessibility, and they really make sure that your systems, AI systems, should be designed to be inclusive and to be accessible by everyone. So you have to make sure that if you're building something, don't just build it for typical people, but maybe people who have hearing disabilities or seeing disabilities or different types of disabilities should also be able to access and to use your systems. So as I said earlier, we have other frameworks other than the Microsoft one. UNESCO has a framework. Singapore has a framework. The NIST has also another framework. These are some examples, and they almost all cover the same pillars. So they all talk about transparency, fairness, accountability, privacy, and security. So these are covered. However, I found a couple of pillars that were not covered by the Microsoft ones that I want to talk to you about. One of them is called the beneficence versus non-maleficence, and this is part of the UNESCO framework. And the idea is that we have to differentiate between what is beneficent or non-maleficent AI. So the principles of beneficence is do good, right? You should be good. The principles of non-maleficence is do not harm. And there's a difference between building systems that are not harmful versus building systems that are actually good. So instead of just focusing on don't harm or build systems that are not harmful, we should focus on building good systems, right? Good AIs that actually have a goal of being good to humanity, have a goal of being like they want to improve people's life instead of I just don't want to hurt someone's life. So that's the kind of the concept behind beneficence versus non-maleficence. And another pillar I found interesting in the UNESCO one is the human rights, obviously. So UNESCO focuses a lot on human rights, and they have a pillar where we want these AI systems to focus on civil and political rights, the right to live, liberty, property, freedom of expressions, pursuit of happiness, and equality before the law, and also social and cultural and economic rights. So the right to participate in science and culture, the right to work, and the right to education. And again, we need to build systems that have these rights in mind. They have these rights at the heart of what they do, and not, they're kind of overseeing them and then moving forward. Another pillar is the sustainability and environment pillar. So we also need to make sure that these systems are good for the environment, and this is important with the whole situation and climate change and the impact on the environment. So we all know that training AI systems and running AI systems require a lot of GPUs, a lot of computing power, and this computing power have some effect on the environment, right? Because we're burning electricity, we're producing a lot of energy to sustain them. So also it's important to figure out how is these systems actually impacting the environment. Of course, AI can help us a lot in monitoring and understanding and predicting some consequences of the climate change, right? So it's important that we also use AI to figure out how can we be more ecologically sustainable, how can we be more eco-friendly, how can we create or design green cities, green ways to transportation, etc. And finally, I would like to wrap up this talk by this concept or this question and ask you to think about if in the future you go into a court of law and you find out that the judge is actually a robot or an AI. Would you want to be judged by a robot, or would you still feel like a robot would be unfair or would be biased or sometimes would be, I don't know, not taking your favor as much as a human judge would be? So just to think, an idea to think about. And yeah, that to end this talk, Stephen Hawking once said, AI is likely the best or the worst thing to happen to humanity. And so it's a tool, it's a technology. We have to know how to use it. We have to know how to make sure it benefits us, and it's not something that that's kind of bringing the worst to humanity. So thank you all for listening. I hope this was clear, and I hope you learned something. If you have any questions, I'm happy to answer.
Thank you, Christophe, for this enlightening presentation about ethics and AI. I see you covered most of the fields that are common between the two, the ethics and AI. It was very, very insightful. I hope I have some questions, but I hope the students can start with their questions. So if anyone has any questions, you can type it in the chat, or you can phone and just talk.
Okay, I have a question.
Yeah, go ahead, Muhammad.
When you said they can access our data, انه بيقولوا لنا انه نحن بدنا انه نشوف الداتا تاعتها. Do they give us the choice to refuse or let them use our data or not? In the previous one, in the safety, ايش كان اسمها لحظة؟ safety, in the safety part, I think.
Yeah, I mean, it depends on the platform, but basically all websites or platforms nowadays follow the GDPR guidelines, right? So under that framework, you have the right to say, to understand what data is being collected, how it's being used, and you can say, I want or I don't want to give you that data. So you have that power. I hope this answers your
Actually,
question.
Chris, I'm currently in France, so whenever I open a new website, the first thing that pops up, do you want to accept which cookies I want to accept, which cookies I want to reject? And it's kind of bothering at the first time, but it's there to protect your privacy and your data.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's actually legally enforceable in Europe, but I think a lot of the places in the world started adopting the same ideas because it's a good framework, right? It makes sense, and it's a good way to protect the user's data.
Yeah, I had a from Katya, but I think she disconnected from out of the session. She was asking the following: it would seem that after decades of software development, there would be some that software and AI work as specified in the customer requirements. Is it that vendors are unwilling to perform sufficient testing, or is it possible to test everything? She's asking about testing. Finding a certain number of bugs doesn't mean that the software has. On the other hand, not finding any defects doesn't mean that there aren't any defects for either. Is it even possible to get rid of all bugs, especially when the software that was developed and tested by others? She wanted to ask this, but I guess she just.
Okay, so you're breaking off a bit, but I think I got the idea behind the question. And AI systems are not exactly like software systems. They're not that deterministic where we know exactly what we're gonna get, right? In software, you write the code and then you run it and then you look out for bugs and that's it. Once you've solved the bugs, typically speaking, there should not be any unexpected outputs. Whereas AI systems are a bit more probabilistic and you can't really test them for all scenarios, right? And you can't really predict exactly what's going to be the outputs. Of course, we need to test these systems, and they are being tested, but it's also something that is evolving, right? So we're always training new models and releasing new AI systems, and it's all about like how do we make sure that as we're developing the systems, we are testing them on the right things, right? And because they're impacting more powerfully or more parts of our lives, we have to make sure that as we develop them, they're taking this thing into consideration, right? So the data that we use to train has to be, for example, not biased and not including any wrong data or misinformation or things like that. So I don't know if this answers the question, but it's not as simple when it comes to AI systems as it is when it comes to software, right?
Yeah. I guess we have two other questions from Hamad Ammar in the chat and Gilbert.
Yeah, I saw Muhammad's question. So he said, can't ethics be simply added to the AI system? I mean, sure, but again, what is ethics? one of the challenges is that we don't really have a clear set of values. I'll give you an example, Muhammad. If you go to ChatGPT, right, and if you ask it to make a joke about President Trump, it's going to easily make a joke about President Trump. If you go and ask it to make the same joke or to make a different joke on President Biden, it's going to say, no, sorry, I cannot do that. I don't joke about President Biden. Why is the case? This is one small example, but why is that the case? It's because people who developed ChatGPT, OpenAI, they've added their own values to the system. They've kind of trained it to be kind of more on this side than that side. So AI doesn't get trained by itself. There are people behind AI, right? So people who are building these systems, if I believe that if these are my values, I'm going to put these values on the AI system. But my values might be different from your values, Muhammad. So my AI will not be ethical in your perspective, right? And your AI might not be ethical in my perspective. So simply adding ethics to AI is not that simple, right? Plus, sometimes companies will do what makes most profit for them, which sometimes doesn't really care about ethics as much as making like doing what's legally permittable by the law is different than doing what's ethical, right? Legally speaking, you can do things that are not actually good. You can replace people's jobs. You can do whatever. You can eliminate this. You can do that. This is legally doable, but ethically speaking or morally speaking, it's not a good thing. So it's not that simple. It's a gray area, and that's why people are still discussing it. So Gilbert asked, may someone ask AI about our data that already has it? I don't know. I don't know what you mean exactly, but yes, if AI was trained on your data, then it knows that data. To what extent do you believe AI has the potential to replace certain human tasks and roles in the future, and what jobs are most at risk of being replaced by AI? Actually, it's not in the future, it's right now. AI is automating some jobs and it's creating a lot of new jobs. And that's nothing new, right? AI has been doing, or any technology has been doing it since we started creating technologies. Every technology will automate, will replace, will change jobs, and also will create new jobs. So it depends on like what kind of jobs will be automated or replaced. Basically, this is a difficult point, by the way, because we initially thought that the jobs that will be replaced initially by AI would be what we call a blue collar jobs. So things that you would do manually, like a plumber or physical tasks, and then the creative task would be automated the last. But in the last 1 year or 2 years, we've seen that actually AI has come to the creative task, to the graphic design task, to the thinking, brainstorming, text creation, copywriting, like ChatGPT and all of these tools. So it's actually difficult to exactly know which task will be removed, but things are moving really fast. So just keep up with the technology and don't feel like it's going to take over your job, right? It's going to take over some tasks that you do in your job, which is great because now you can automate those tasks and focus on doing other things. So don't feel like AI will put you out of a job. In fact, learn AI and adopt it, and you'll always have a job. Yeah. So no AI can be absolutely 100% objective since it was designed by humans and you are inherently subjective. Technically, yeah. Technically speaking, AI is really depending on the data that you feed it. And if I clean the data in a specific way, if I prepare the data in a way that focuses more on my values, then yes, AI will not be 100% objective. That's why it's good to have a competition, to have different types of AI, right? This AI is a bit more on that side, this is AI on that side. So that way we can hopefully cover like different perspectives and different values or ethical frameworks. Any other question?
I have you answered most of the questions I have prepared, but I have a question about how can we ensure that AI systems make ethical decisions, especially in scenarios where there's a conflict between different moral principles or cultural norms. You agree that you have different ethical principles, and sometimes these ethical principles come into conflict. So if you do this or you do that, these may be into conflict. How can we make sure that AI can make the right decision under these dilemmas?
Yeah, I mean, exactly the idea why we need ethical frameworks, right? And why we need to be clear on how these systems are behaving. So if one company is building AI and that's it, then everyone's gonna follow whatever that company's ethical framework is. But when you have a competition and when you have different companies building different AIs, and then if you don't like this AI's ethical frameworks, you can use another one. So I would say that's how you can overcome this issue. But it's not a simple issue, so there's no clear answer, to be honest.
Just saying something that McDonald's begin to replace their workers by AI. Yes.
Yeah, they launched this in Texas, a branch that is kind of fully. But actually, to be clear, it's fully automated on the front side, but in the kitchen, it's still workers who are cooking and making the burgers and everything. But you order through a kiosk, and then it gets delivered directly without a human giving it to you.
Okay. Any other questions? Chris, I know you're very busy.
Yeah. I mean, ordering from screen is nothing new. Yes, we've had it before, and soon it will be fully automated, so it replaces human. Maybe it will replace humans in the kitchen. I'm not saying it won't, but again, we've been automating people out of jobs for a while. This is not different, right? There's a lot of new jobs that are being created. So again, fairness and equity is basically people who are developing these systems have to make sure that the data they're using is fair, it's not biased, it's not contain any, I don't know, information that is wrong. So so in a nutshell, these are the quick measures that can be taken. But it's not as simple as that, again.
Okay. Thank you guys for participating, everyone. Thank you, Chris, for this very insightful webinar. I hope in the future we can do live seminars at the university, and maybe we can do something with Zaka and Beirut AI. Thank you, everyone. There's just one small video about Kasparov. I don't know if you know him. He was the chess world champion in chess, and he started a competition with the Deep Blue, an IBM supercomputer, in playing chess. The first time Kasparov won, and then he lost. And he talks about the values of humans and the values of AI. So if you have the chance, everyone, try to see this. It's on YouTube. It's few minutes, 15 minutes. So try to see this. Thank you, Chris. Thank you, everyone. I hope this was a fruitful webinar. We're going to be having another one in January. I'll be inviting you all to this.
Thank you for having me. Have a great day. Bye-bye.